Hello, I'm Chris Moon, one of the luckiest people to be alive you're likely to meet. I survived as a prisoner of the Khmer Rouge. After leaving the army, where I did 3 years in operations, I was blown up working for a charity clearing landmines, losing my lower right arm and leg. I survived against all the odds. Less than a year after I did my first marathon, and I became the world's first amputee ultra-distance runner in 1997 when I did the Marathon de Sable. Still doing all those things. And I share my experiences in a way that helps people do what they do better. What's useful about experiences on the balance of life and death and the limit of human endurance is that any pretense we have as human beings is stripped away, and we're left with the simple wisdom and principles if we choose to use them. So, welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Series. And here is your host, Jonathan Bowman-Perks.
Chris, thank you. It's a real great honor to have you on this series. I look around at all the leadership speakers and the motivational speakers, and you're one of the top guys there. I really respect and admire you. And it was lovely. We first connected about 2 years ago, and we were planning to have a recording then, and then the lockdown came and face-to-face went. But it is interesting when we chatted then and just now, it's like we were two old friends because we served together in the Green Howards, now the Yorkshire Regiment. There's a special bond, there's a special connection of people who have served together. And, but also just some of the experiences you've had and the values you hold. That's why I wanted you on the Inspiring Leadership Series. And it was interviewing Hugh Owen recently. And he said the person I use in my organization, ARC Data Centers, as one of the top coaches and does some teamwork with us is Chris Moon. That's great. I have such respect for Chris. And here we are. We're now doing the recording. So Chris, it's lovely to have you here. Let's talk about what you're doing now. And then also I'd like to take you back to your upbringing and the journey that you came through as a whistle-stop tour. So tell us what you're doing now.
Well, now I do a lot of motivational speaking. More recently, of course, we've moved online. I do a lot of keynote speeches, bringing to an end conferences, delivering the key emotional messages with a call to action, and also do a lot of work on resilience and change, sharing experiences, and then using the academic rigor that I've learned over the years through working with psychologists, psychiatrists, and the business schools. And I did my master's in human behavior to deliver principles that have academic rigor, but at the same time, it's the experience and stories that help us change. I advise a number of individuals and teams, and I coach a number of leaders and support people to achieve and go beyond perhaps the things that limit us in life.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I've heard such great reviews of you. So people can reach out and find you on LinkedIn, and I think they should do. Let's go back to the young Chris Moon as you were growing up. Who influenced you? Who shaped you? How did you end up going to the Royal Military Police and the Green Howards? Like that? Just tell us a bit of a journey, and then obviously the Halo Trust as well.
Yeah, I'm incredibly fortunate to have had a father with very humble man, but he'd had his own challenges in life. He was an army commander in the Second World War. He'd lost a lung, but he overcame all of that. And I guess in a way, he was a very good role model. He seldom complained, and he used to get on with it. I think another really close friend of the family, my dad's best friend, a farmer who had been immensely successful. I come from a farming background. We were all farmers. He was very, very focused on getting the job done, worked incredibly hard, and they were wonderful role models. And my aunt had polio. She was a great aunt, and she was remarkable. I guess when I was growing up, someone who I talked to a lot, and she had very, very strong values around respecting people and being of service. So I guess that was an early start. And my first leadership experience, real challenge came, I think, when I was 13. I went to a boarding school. It was quite a small school, to cram for common entrance. And it was really a great education in the principle of the Lord of the Flies being absolutely true. And in my first term, I saw some behaviors that I didn't think were particularly acceptable, too much fighting. And, there was the kids used to throw stones from the cliff top onto the sea at kids who was sort of lured onto the beach, and I didn't find that acceptable. In my second term, I was made deputy head boy, and I stopped the stonings. And this, I think, was a great leadership lesson for me to recognize it is not a popularity contest. It is about what is doing right. And I met this massive wall of resistance. You're a square, you're not fun, you're not playing by the rules. How dare you stop us and use your authority? And I said, look, this is the right thing to do. It's not right. None of you like it when you get down there and they all throw stones at you. And afterwards, after I'd done that, every single kid came up to me quietly and said, do you know, I'm really glad you did that. So I think moral courage was something I had to learn young. Then when I went on to become head boy there, then moved on being senior prefect in the other schools I went to. So that was a great lesson. It's not a popularity contest. It's about doing what's right, but also doing it in a way that we can get people to buy in. Went to agricultural college. I was in a farming partnership up until the age of 21. My business partner and my dad's best friend was a wonderful man, taught me a great deal. We had to do the work of two people. That was how he said we would be effective and be profitable. So we had to plan and think things through. It was all about thinking with him and looking at better and new ways of doing things. He had a great philosophy to work and life and said, look, we've got to look after ourselves, both physically and mentally. Very ahead of his time in saying we've got to look after our mental health, because we were isolated milking the cows and we had to be there 7 days a week so he could never be sick or injured. Unfortunately, his knees and hips went. And that's maybe a learning for us all. What do we do to look after our long-term physical and mental health? So I faced that difficult issue. Big lesson here, I think, in personal leadership. Face difficult issues and they stop being so difficult. And I worried about this for months. And I learned that worrying is pointless. You've got to do something about it, face it. And I said to him one day, look, I should do something else. We should sell up. You should enjoy your money, rather than I was gradually buying him out. And he wanted somebody to take on who had the enthusiasm to do that. But agriculture was changing. It was becoming less profitable. So we faced that difficult issue. He went off, he enjoyed his money, story with a very happy ending. He lived happily ever after until he was 92. He had a great life. Wow. And at the same time—
That was your dad?
No, that was my business partner.
Your business partner, yeah.
And I wanted to do something humanitarian. And of course, back then, being a Thatcher child, I decided the humanitarian thing to do was join the army and learn how to kill people. I am, of course, only joking on that point. I joined because I believed in service. There was a threat to the United Kingdom. My grandfather and father had both fought in the First and Second World War, and they taught me something about how people behave during times of violence and great change and lack of accountability. I learned the mark of the individual is not what they do. The mark of the individual is what they would do if they didn't think they would be found out. Accountability is everything. People will do the most terrible things during time of conflict unless they are held accountable. And that was why I chose to become commissioned in the Royal Military Police. I had a great time at Sandhurst. I loved the army. Did 3 years in counter-terrorist operations, as you know, left, and then went to work for the Halo Trust. I did have a great time in the army. And I suppose if I had my time again, I would just stay a little bit longer. But the Halo Trust for me was tremendous. There was such an opportunity to make a difference. Landmines at that point seemed an insurmountable problem. I went to Cambodia initially. I ran teams there, supervising and running operations, initially in Passat and then in the Northwest, where there was a huge landmine problem. It was a great lesson in leadership and brought together my farming background, agricultural engineering and development. And it was a place where I could really, I think, use all my talents to the full. And it was very much about growing people. Our success was through getting the local staff trained up to take responsibility for operations. And it was a great education in leadership. I then went on after 2 years to work in Mozambique, where ironically, on the 7th of March 1995, I was blown up doing the least dangerous thing. I walked back up a safe lane where it wasn't possible for really complex technical and behavioral reasons to locate one landmine. The guys just couldn't find it. However, I did always say if my blokes missed a landmine, I wanted to be the first to know about it. It wasn't quite what I meant. But look, you know, if I was to go down that lane again today, there's nothing I could do differently. I fought for life. Those basic things that the military teach us about procedure, about keeping your state of mind reasonable, current, getting all the drills right. So I knew we had very good medical training in Halo. I knew what to do to treat myself, but also I was still funding that operation. I was responsible for it. I was the man in charge, and I was doing an investigation. I was operating alone. My backup team were on the road, and I was really lucky that just that day there happened to be a Kazakh helicopter in the area. So I got taken to hospital pretty quickly, but I started to die in the minefield. I knew physically when your body starts closing down, you know it. And of course, one of the things I had done when I got there was we rehearsed all our casualty evacuation drills, and I did it with the leaders as the casualties, never thinking in my wildest dreams that I would end up being a casualty. I focused on my reasons for living. Reasons are psychological rocket fuel. When I started to physically die, I knew I couldn't die because I didn't want to die before my parents. That would destroy their lives. I didn't want to die because I was responsible for my niece. I was her godfather, and I didn't want to leave an empty gap in her 5-year-old life. I also passionately believed in my work with the Halo Trust and in the great work the organization itself did. And I had a responsibility to my guys. I couldn't die because I knew it would be really bad for funding for my program. So I made it. They said there was no point in flying me out because I would die in Mozambique from lack of blood. But lucky for me, Halo had great insurance and great backup drills from headquarters. And the insurance company agreed to pay for a flight to fly my body back. I got put on the aircraft with my help from my friend, a Belgian doctor. I managed to keep breathing for another 14 hours, got to South Africa. And when I got there, they said they'd never seen anybody live with such a small amount of blood. I was told I'd be there probably 5 or 6 months. But in actual fact, I was there 3.5 weeks. I had a sense of humor. I focused on the positive outcomes. I worked really hard with the wonderful medical staff helping me. Got out of there 3.5 weeks, came back to London, 3.5 weeks, getting my artificial limbs fitted. A week of that was actually in quarantine. And then I taught myself to run again. My experience is quite different, I think, possibly to the army these days. I taught myself to run again, did my own rehab really once I'd learned to walk, did my first marathon less than a year after leaving hospital. With my friend, actually, Hugh Owen, who's been here, we agreed to do a challenge because he thought the London Marathon was a bit too easy for me just after being blown up. So I did the Marathon des Sables, done most of the world's toughest ultra marathons. It's part of not why does a one-legged man do that? Well, it's about not being beaten by the badness we sometimes experience. It is about overcoming adversity, challenging the concept of limitation, showing that we don't need to be beaten by the bad things that sometimes happen to us. I've never had a down moment about being blown up because I have values that make me recognize I need to not be the center of my universe and see beyond myself. I was asked to tell my story. I wrote an autobiography about surviving as a prisoner of the Khmer Rouge and my journey. I was simply asked to tell my story. That was how I started speaking more than 20 years ago. And there's been an evolution. I've run lots of leadership programs, team building, worked with the business schools, but I love delivering keynotes. I also do quite a lot of work in the field of health and safety and risk, delivering real experiences that people can use to keep those principles at the forefront of their minds, because we gradually get used to risk. Our perception is up here when we start off, but it drops off when we get into a dangerous environment. We get used to it and we stop seeing things as dangerous. So I can share experiences that bring us back up here to a perception of risk where we are aware that we need to have things at the forefront of our mind. I love speaking to live audiences and sharing my experiences and helping people do what they do better. Different people will take different aspects of the principles, but life's all about making the best of life and squeezing all the juice out of life. It's truly a gift we sometimes take for granted.
Brilliant, Chris, and hugely inspiring story. I think probably of the 170, that takes the biscuit. And I will take you up on that. The charity that Lee, my wife, set up, the Inspiring Leadership Trust, is for vulnerable women. So we've got people in South Africa, KwaZulu-Natal, who we've helped the young poor girls there who've gone through awful situations, in Kenya as well. But in this country, with serious and organized crime, we work with the Home Office and the Department for Work and Pensions. And we get great motivational speakers to generously give their time to speak to the volunteers who are mentors and coaches to the girls who are going through the abuse and the modern day slavery and trafficking. And I think you'd be a great speaker. So we'll chat about that after. I'll connect you with Lee. Thank you for that. Wow. Where do we go from there? So interested next in all the different experiences you've had. Firstly, your proudest moment, what you learned from it. And secondly, your darkest moment, and what did you learn from that, Chris?
I think probably my proudest moment in leadership terms was when I was running the Halo program in the northwest of Cambodia, when we handed over field operations to our Cambodian team leaders. And we were doing the operations, we trained them up, we stepped back, and they rose to the challenge. I did also have a challenge around that time, because there was accidents were then classed as preventable and non-preventable. It was a non-preventable accident. A guy prodded, as he was trained to do, to the side of a fragmentation device that he picked up with his metal detector, and it touched a pin, the release pin to an MUV4 fuse, and the device initiated injuring him quite badly. But we looked after him. Our CASVAC drills worked really well, got him to the hospital, and he was absolutely fine. So I had to do an investigation to understand how this had happened. And I found out during my investigation the device had been booby-trapped. So we knew it was a non-preventable accident, but it was the first accident the guys had had. And I got them all together, and so a lot of them on 2 lorry loads, so about 120 guys. And we all sat down in the minefield. I explained the results of my investigation. And I told them that, we could still work safely, because a lot of them were very concerned. And I told them that I would be the first man going into the minefield and starting work again. And I explained the learning about the booby trap device, what we could do next time to change our procedures. Because quite often, if you speak to the ATOs from Northern Ireland in the 70s, they say that their standard operating procedures were developed by the blood of previous operators. And so, it's about taking that learning, because you don't know everything. And that's why mine clearance becomes safer and safer all the time, because we are constantly learning. So I took the learning from that incident. We changed our procedure slightly. And I thought, I'm not sure how the guys are going to receive this, but I will be absolutely honest with them, and I will lead by example. And to my great joy and utter surprise, as soon as I finished speaking, they all stood up and gave me a standing ovation.
Fantastic. Brilliant, Chris. And darkest moment in your personal life? Or
I think this is really embarrassing, but I will tell you. Okay, so there's a race near where I live called the West Highland Way race, and it is great fun. It's 95 miles. It's one of the toughest races I've done. And it is 95 miles that has to be completed in under 33 hours over really difficult terrain. And you have a support crew who look after you. The race rules, it's a real family. It's a family of volunteers who come and help support this race. But it is a real tough race. And I have 1 year, it was really dry on the course throughout the West Highland Way walking route. And I broke both my artificial legs. So they literally fell apart. And there was some learning there that we could take back. I've been testing legs for 20 years. And the learning from those 2 breakages we took back, and we were able to sort it out and improve the prosthesis and the way that it worked. But I came back to do the race again the next year, and I'd had flu. And I thought, no, I'm going to have to not do it. I'm going to have to not do it. And all my ultra distinct running friends said, look, this bug's been going around. A couple of people have had it. They've already pulled out. Look, you've only just got it. You should pull out. Don't do the race. And I felt better the day before the race. I thought, I felt better. I've done it. It's a virus. I've overcome everything else. I can overcome this. But of course, what I'd overcome was very different. I'd overcome physical injury, I'd overcome pain, I'd overcome dehydration, all things that were within my domain. So I started the race, I did 26 miles and my flu came back. And then I thought, actually, I really shouldn't have done that. I should have listened. So it's embarrassing for two reasons. Number one, because I didn't listen. Number two, because I think that I didn't use my experience appropriately. I'd gone through so many other things. And I think probably what I'm trying to explain here is why I find it embarrassing is because, you know, my experience said to me, this is risky. My reason and analytics said, it's pointless, don't do it. But my heart said, go on, give it a go.
Yeah.
But the learning that I passed on to other people and my other friends who are ultra runners has been immensely helpful. And the learning that I've got out of it means that I will be able to still meet my goal of running ultra distance in my 80s.
Yeah, it is a remarkable story that you tell. And it reminds me of a friend of mine who's also in Scotland, Paul Chapman. And Paul, who's a headhunter, said you need to think about many of the decisions you make about life in the four quadrants of head, heart, gut, and wallet. I often have to say to people, look, my heart says I'd love to help you, but my head says I just don't have the capacity in my diary. And if I do this for you, I'm actually going to stop doing something for my wife and my daughters and my son. So actually, no, I won't be doing it. So balancing what the heart says you'd love to do with what the head says logically you can do is something that's served me well.
I love that. Tell me that again. Head, heart,
gut, and wallet. And that's head, heart, gut, and wallet. Because of course the wallet is, particularly when people are going for jobs, you know, is it logical? The head, you know, 98 billion neurons, is this logical? Heart, 100 million neurons around the heart, the second brain, as they call it. Would you love doing that? Gut, heart has 40,000 neurons around the heart. The gut has 100 million, and this is where serotonin comes from your gut, as you know.
Yeah,
I've done a whole study about the microbiome, which I find very interesting, the holobiome, which is all of our microbes. But in the 100 million, you have a sort of gut instinct about something. Does it feel right or does it not? Gut instinct. And there's lots of calculations going on. So trust that. Do trust the gut, but you need to check the others. And then wallet, you know, like I got a great job after PwC, which was going to be at Ashridge. And I just would love to, you know, be a teacher at Ashridge College. That would be really interesting. But I looked at the finance of it and moving my family down to live in that beautiful part of the world from Yorkshire, I couldn't have afforded to do it. And I was working in PwC, I would have been on, you know, a third of the money. I just went, guys, I would love to have done it, but it just, the wallet bit doesn't add up. So head, heart, gut, and wallet. It served me well and served others well. Chris, what piece of advice do you wish you had when you'd started out? So if we went back and met the 16 to 18-year-old young Chris Moon, knowing what you know now, what bit of advice would you give to a young man?
Okay, so to the 16, 18-year-old Chris Moon who lived in the countryside, who's very extrovert, I would say make the effort to reach out to people, connect with people, don't be isolated, and also don't be intimidated by people. Don't be shy, don't let people, there are people out there who will particularly enjoy this is a reality of it. Some people enjoy knocking others down. Don't let anybody knock you down. Be confident, don't be cocky, believe in yourself, and remember, we blossom according to our courage.
That's great advice. Great advice. And then we're getting around the 8 components of the Inspiring Leadership Compass. Interested in hearing, you know, quick fire questions here, but moral quotient, MQ. What have been the 2 foundational, the top 3 foundational values that you've lived by, and what's happened when you've let them slip, and how do you get yourself back to live according to your values? Because it's very important to you, I know.
Yes, it is. So I think the number 1 value for me is that I have a passionate belief in the dignity of the individual. And that is why the work that your wife does is so important to me. But also in leadership, I have seen it go horribly wrong when leaders don't have that principle and they are unaware of their effect on other people. And at the same time, I've also seen leaders who are abusive, who enjoy humiliating people. And I find that absolutely abhorrent. And I think the second principle is actually most of us know what's right. Most of us have a feeling. There are those who maybe don't, but the majority of us do. So do what you know is right, because actually, if you don't, it will diminish you. And I do believe that what goes around comes around, and people do reap what they sow. They might not always realize it. And bear in mind, it's not necessarily having things that makes us happy. It is doing things. I've seen some incredibly wealthy people who have little value or meaning in their life, and everything is very superficial. Value and meaning comes from our relationships. And also, I think, recognize we're all different. I connect with nature. I'm very, very rooted in that. And I grew up in the countryside. I relate to animals, to nature. I love gardening. So do things that you love and make the effort to face up, to have the courage to do what we think is right in life and be where we want to be. Because it's always easier not to do something. So have a plan and do what you know is right.
I love that. The next one is PQ. What gives your life meaning and purpose? And you've come across the words like dharma, calling, vocation. Why do you do what you do, Chris?
I genuinely actually feel that I do have a vocation. Possibly it's because I grew up in a village with the Church of England where they talked about vocation. People had really strong views on what was right and wrong. But church, I guess, then for me was not so much religious as very much a connection of people with different views. So we'd all chat afterwards. And that was a really interesting way to grow up, where, you know, a retired brigadier would come over and just have a chat with you about what was happening in your life in the village. So it was a very great social experience. I'm not sure necessarily particularly religious, but that was really helpful for me to have these conversations about what you thought was right. And they were very good, those kind of people where I lived, at actually saying, well, what do you think? And making you think and helping you to grow. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, that's great. Remind me after this, I'll get you to talk to Henry Perks, who's my nephew, and he's just finishing his time in the Commandos, Royal Engineer Commandos. And I think he hasn't had the best of all experiences, but he's just been awarded the Engineer-in-Chief's Award as one of the most finest officers in the Royal Engineers. But he goes, oh, it's nothing really. I go, no, it's a really big thing. But he doesn't know what to do next. And okay. I think he could have a chat with a Chris Moon. I think Chris,
you'd be wonderful. Yeah, see, that's one of the things that I really love to do. So my vocation is to share my experiences, which I'm very privileged to have, and to ask people questions. You know, when we last met, I was talking about how we solve our problems in life. It's through asking positive questions that will lead us to be the hero of our own life. So that, for me, I guess, is a vocation. But also, I have been so privileged to have had the experiences that I've had now. And of course, even more so to have survived them. So I've had experiences that I haven't met anybody else who's had in the same way. And on the ultra runs that I still do, I think a lot and I learn a lot. And so I have a great deal that I want to share. And that's what drives me to speak, but also to entertain. Humor is one of our greatest coping mechanisms.
Oh, humor is very, and you remind me of the audiobook I was listening to about the former Navy SEAL who does all these ultra events. What's his name? Come on, you must.
I've met him in Badwater in Death Valley. It's my favorite race. It's 135 miles through the hottest place on earth, and you meet amazing people like that there.
What was his name? Can you remember his name? He's a black guy.
I'll have to look it up. I've met quite a few SEALs there, actually.
Yeah, but he was just Can't Hurt Me. His books. Look, read the book. Can't Hurt Me. And I'll think of the guy's name, but just inspirational that what he'd pushed himself through, which leads me on to health and well-being, HQ, the next component of the Inspiring Leadership Compass. What's been your experience of all these things you've done about keeping yourself physically and mentally fit, and how you pick yourself up when you let yourself slip?
Okay, I think the measure for me, the good analogy would be, we've all got so much fuel in the tank. And I think this is particularly important with mental health, to recognize that we don't want to run the batteries out. We don't want to run out of fuel. So we need to do things that will firstly keep our head in the right place, because if our head's in the right place, our physical fitness will tend to follow that, if we can be disciplined to do that. And recognize that being healthy is a discipline. It is simply something that we should do. It is our responsibility to look after ourselves. The health service cannot do that for us. So there are several components to it. The first one is get your head in the right place, make the effort to look after ourselves. And with regard to mental health, I did some work with a psychologist who studied people in the British government service who were sent to the most challenging places and the most dangerous places on the planet. And he did a study into how they coped. And what was really interesting was, I was so excited because I thought, oh, there must be a model here. And he said, well, that's what I thought, but there isn't. But we did learn something else that's really important. The people who coped really well, who didn't get PTSD, I was used as a study by some psychiatrists into why don't you get PTSD, because I didn't get it. Because I worked really hard not to do it. So what I'm about to share, I think, is why I didn't get it. Because I understood this principle that the psychologist found in these people he studied, which is those who coped had a mind to. And when it started to get challenging, they asked for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength. The weakest thing to do is just sit there wibbling like a jelly and not asking for help. Ask for help. That's my first point. Second point, take ownership. Take ownership and responsibility. Make the effort to do things that recharge our psychological batteries. And maybe if there are people that drag us down, we should find a way of dealing with that or avoiding them, because that happens to a lot of people, and they're not always keen to talk about it in my experience, but sometimes they do get dragged down. And so we need to have our own strategies, and I'm quite good at helping people develop their own strategies now for doing that. And then physically, I think it's really, I am such a fan of walking or running. I love running, but you've got to do it in a way, I think, with a sensible long-term view. Look after yourself. The amputees that I knew running marathons 20 years ago, all of them can't run at all now because they've worn out the limb that they've got. And they've just basically worn out their ligaments and tendons. And so look after your long-term health.
That's so true. And for example, I'm just 60 now, or almost 60. And I went for a run with my daughter, Bryony, and we used to love running. It's been my big thing. I hold the record for the Cypress Double Mountain Marathon, 8 hours and 9 minutes up Mount Troodos.
Actually, sorry, forgive me, just if I may just contribute one thing. I heard about you before we met.
Oh, right.
They said that bloke, Jonathan Bowman, has got a great set of legs on him. And talking about that marathon that you did, and I said, yeah, he's got great legs and so many of them.
That's a lovely story. Thank you. I like that one. Well, I went for a run with Brian the other day, and it was all roads, just 6K, but it was in sort of West Hampstead and a bit hilly, and again the damn bursa behind the knee pops up like a golf ball, and it always does when I run on roads. And which reminds me, you probably all got a tip for that. James Bashall, General James Bashall, who's another friend of Dave Hudson's, who we've talked about, who's been on the series, and James has been on the series too. As the Colonel Commandant of the PT Corps, the wily old PT Sergeant Major said, now you get to 60, sir, stop doing junk miles. He said, what do you mean? He said, you love the running, don't you? He said, but it's inflammation. And as you get older, it's the thing you need to switch from that to HIIT training. So I now do three days a week HIIT training, and it really helps me. But it's interesting, when I got back out running on roads again, up the old bursa popped up. Have you seen that ever happen?
I've had bursitis on with a prosthesis that didn't quite fit right on the front of my knee, and it was really painful, sort of housemaid's knee, isn't it? And it's from that inflammation caused by usually the impact. Yeah, I've probably had most of these things, but I also, I think a really important principle, which I thank you for reminding me to include, is, you know, it's really important to know when not to train. Yeah. That's what this is about, isn't it? That people just keep on doing what they've always done. But also, I notice a lot of people from the military, when they do staff jobs, stop training. And particularly perhaps at SO1 level, when they stop training, that's when they get the injuries when they come back.
Yes. Yeah.
So I also think you've just got to keep on going. I did the London Marathon a couple of years ago. I've done it many, many times, but I finished and I was quite pleased. I did a PB. It was about 3:45.
Wow.
And I crossed the line with a guy who looked about, you know, probably mid-60s. And I said to him, look, congratulations, you know, for me, I'm thrilled that I've just done this, but I don't mean to be disrespectful, but for a man who looks about mid-60s, that is a phenomenal time. And you really sprinted that last bit with no effort at all. If you don't mind me asking, what's the secret? And he said, well, I'm thrilled that you asked me, thank you, because it now gives me a chance to tell you that I'm 75. Wow. And the secret I want to share with everyone is don't stop. You've got to keep going and change your training, ease off if it is difficult, but don't stop. Don't let your muscles decline, because when you lose the muscles around the knee, that's when you get the trouble. So the consultant surgeons that I know have said, look, do you know what? Runners' knees are probably much worse, but if they keep the muscle around them, the muscle acts like a shock absorber and works the joint.
Well, you're so right. And I have found during the lockdown for the last 18 months, I've done this sort of three HIIT training sessions a week. And I've also got a personal trainer who comes to the garage here and trains my wife 3 times a week, and then me once a week. And I have found that combined with yoga on the other days, I have, apart from this, bursitis, in a year and a half, I've had no injuries at all, because there's so much more strength. I'm stronger now near 60 than I've ever been when I was a young army officer, because I had proper training. And while we did lots of physical things and I did airborne training and things like that, I didn't actually have any proper training in HIIT and how to look after the muscles and that kind of stuff. And we were all rather amateur at it. And as a result, I took a number of injuries over the years, as I'm sure you.
I think that's very fair of the army then. I think that there was, well, when I first went through Sandhurst and came out, there was this attitude of no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
And I think that we now, I've got various friends who've gone through the physical training, Army Physical Training Corps. That is an attitude that they would just roll their eyes to the ceiling and put their heads in their hands with embarrassment over. So the way that military training is conducted now and has been for the last 20 years is much more enlightened.
Yes, very much so.
And yes, but I do think your point is a very fair one. I remember back then, you know, you'd go on courses and they just expect you to be fit when you got there without giving out any training programs.
No, it's so true. And I remember doing the airborne training with, as I say, with Dave Hudson and James Bash, another guy called Julian Bramall, who lovely, through hearing the podcasts, he reached out. He's in Abu Dhabi, and he and Dave and I used to push this maroon Mini, we call the Mini machine, to get it started. We pushed it down the hill and then jumped into it from the officer's mess, and it sailed down the hill to get to the bottom for the training. But we went and did the pre-training before P Company, which was even more severe training than P Company itself. You get through the pre-para, you'd be fine on para, but people got so many injuries in the pre-para because they just sort of came into it not properly.
I've heard a lot of that, and I'm very aware of people who were just run ragged and picked up a whole load of injuries. You can see there's a certain logic to say, and I think this is a really interesting point on leadership in the wider context, that of mindset. So if you look at the mindset of the people running that training, I suspect that it was, look, if we give them this really hard experience and they get through it, then they'll have a very good chance at P Company. But in actual fact, when you made your beat up, so difficult that it weakened people and made them susceptible to injury, because what you're doing with that kind of short, sharp shock is making people much more susceptible to injury.
Yeah,
it's something that where the mindset is clearly not, it doesn't have a full understanding of physical training and how bodies work. And I suspect it was also because units didn't want to send people who might fail. And those courses were actually run, I think, by junior and senior NCOs who were very process orientated. Yeah. Rather than seeing the bigger picture of the analysis of, right, let's understand what's our objective here. It is to get people fit enough to pass this selection course. So what do we need to do that? We need to build them up. We need to get them to be able to run fast, and we need to make sure that the training builds them up rather than breaks them. Yeah. That's kind of, so mindset is amazing. I think it's mindset. Is that fair, by the way?
Oh, so many stories to back up exactly what you said, Chris. So two that I think of. One on the beat up. The corporal hated me because I was a young captain, and so I was the one who was sweeping the whole. Everybody could go home, and then right, you come here. You're sweeping the floor, and I would be sweeping the gym floor for hours, and then he'd come back and check on me just to see if it would break me. And it's all this mental attitude. And I went, fine, thank you, staff, and I just carried on brushing, and. The officers had to lead by example, so they had to be as fit and fitter than the men. So they would often get the soldiers to rest, and the officers would be sent up to do another couple of Heartbreak Hill turns while the guys rested. And then when we came back down, we didn't get a rest, we were just sent with them. And so it had to be this attitude. And that did help me when he for example, he loved picking on me. And what happened was, one of the young gunners, because these signals and the gunners trained together, was lagging at the back. And he said, right, you, sir, in a surly way, he said, carry his pack. And I go, thinking, but I've got a 55-pound pack, and I've got to carry his 55-pound pack. I said, but I've got one, staff. He goes, I know, but put it on the front, stick your arms out. And he took it off this guy, and he put his pack on me. And he just wanted to break me. He really wanted to see. He said, give up. Look, there's a wagon back there. You can jack it. Just get out. You're not really for airborne at all. And I went, thank you, staff, but I think I'll keep going. And I couldn't run. So I just walked for it seemed like 10 minutes. It probably was 5, but it was the longest 5 minutes in my life. And then he went, look, okay. Hey, come back here. Smith, take your pack. And then I could join the group, but I was almost broken. But I think this thing, I did in the beat up, we did the Trinasium and running over all these obstacles. We were wearing shorts and t-shirts. We got muddy and we got wet, and I had to slide down the fireman's pole. And you're not going to have any resistance at all. And I jumped off. And I went all the way down, and I twisted my spine. I could not move. I was paralyzed. And he went, don't worry, here, I'll sort you out. And he, like this corporal, sort of twisted me, and it sort of got me moving again, but I spent the rest of the course not able to do sit-ups because I couldn't sit up. And even on the parachute jumping, I couldn't properly sit up. So I'd sort of roll to one side and then get up. And it haunted me for years to come. And again, it was exactly as you say, Chris. Exactly as you say. Anyway, sorry, you got me reminiscing again. Back to EQ. Let's do some quick fire EQ, CQ, and onwards. What would you say your top tip on building rapport and emotional intelligence skills, Chris?
Recognize that it's not all about you. It is about them. Listen. If I was to say what is the most single important quality of a leader in the modern world, it is the ability to listen. But it's not that simple. You have to let people feel they are listened to and valued. Many leaders are right. They'll be several steps ahead when somebody comes in and says, should we do this? But you need to give people the time and then explain, because if people don't feel listened to, they will not engage. And of course, no one can understand everything. We need to be able to listen. We need to be able to also at the same time help people understand. And it comes back to the principle of having a passionate belief in the dignity of the individual. I think that's hugely important. you know, if you're a leader, people are probably always going to be nice to you because you're the leader. Some people won't like you because you are a leader, but both of those categories are relatively small. But, you know, there are lots of stories of CEOs who've left their role and then they go back into the building to see somebody when they're no longer CEO, and nobody speaks to them because they didn't, you know, they were just not nice to people.
Yeah, that's very true. And the word dignity comes up a lot. I went and did a leadership course at Harvard, and Donna Hicks was the professor who taught us, and she's written a book called Leading with Dignity, and her 10 principles of dignity, but also when you violate dignity. And I think if you remind me, I'll dig them up and share them with you. But it's quite interesting, the 10 components, Donna Hicks, HICKS. CQ is the next one, Chris, which we've sort of found we've been looking into lately, which is this cultural intelligence quotient and collective intelligence of a group of people. What have you found most useful about developing diversity, equality, and inclusion, and this idea of a healthy culture?
Sure. Diversity and inclusion is really, really important to me. And it comes back to this principle of the dignity of the individual. But I was president of Disability Sport England, almost 20 years ago now, for 6 years. And, you know, attitudes to the disabled have changed so much in 20 years, and very, very much for the better. And now we're starting to challenge, you know, attitudes towards mental health. Mental health is just not an issue that affects 20% of the society. You know, mental health affects each and every one of us. You know, and I admire the courage of Dave Hudson being able to speak out, and it's great that he did that, because I know lots of people who haven't spoken out, who suffer in silence. So I think one thing I would say about culture and bringing a team together and getting the best out of each other. And it's actually a book I read called Napoleon Hill, written in the 1930s, called Think and Grow Rich. And in it, he describes creating your mastermind team. And he basically points out that if we can get people working together, they will have an output of, you know, not just say if you're a group of 5, of the intellect of 5 people, there will be a force multiplier there. So if we can connect up, we will be like, it's the experiment you do at school, isn't it, with batteries in series and parallel, that if you get it the right way, they will shine much brighter. And that's what we need to do with our culture. Put it together in a way in which people can shine brightly. But we must also recognize that if we are doing that, we need to keep recharging the batteries.
Brilliant. And talking about recharging the batteries takes me nicely on to resilience quotient. What would be your top tip? You're a man who has shown resilience in so many different ways. What would be your top tip on resilience?
Whoa, now that is such a great question. Never give up. Don't be beaten by the badness. Hold your head high, and never do anything through fear.
That's great, Chris. Thank you. And I think never do anything through fear is a big one, which leads on to brand, reputation, image, and impact, BQ, because in some organizations, people like that CEO, we're talking about commanding officers. You and I talked about an unnamed leader who was a bully, got to very senior rank, was a bully and a bit of a white collar psychopath, and achieved a lot of things, but often their brand or their reputation, what people said about them when they were not in the room, was not a good one. Yeah. What would be your top tip on developing a respected brand and reputation and image and impact?
Firstly, in early life, work out who you are. So work out who we are, what's important to us, and just be yourself. It reminds me of Field Marshal Slim's quote, leadership is just plain you. Be just plain you, but recognize that sometimes we need to modify our behavior. It's not all about us. Have the integrity to stick to your values, and don't think you should do something to be seen to do something. Be who you are.
Yeah, be yourself. Be yourself, only better. I seem to remember
well, that's a great caveat. And I was just trying to think, there's something else I want to say here. And what I would say is we've got to get there every day and be the best version of ourselves that we can be, because it is always a constant journey.
Yeah. Well, Chris, with those moments when you were dying in the minefield, or occasions just like recently, I told you about talking to my brother before he died of cancer. He knew he was going to die. He had about 10 weeks to live, but we had some of the most profound conversations about what really mattered. And they will stay with me always, which nicely goes on to legacy. Legacy is what happens after your death. And I'm a great fan of the Stoics, as I think you must be through.
Yes.
The Daily Stoic by Marcus
Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius did meditations, but Ryan Holiday compiled them all together. And I hadn't really sort of thought about this. My sergeant major at Sandhurst was insulting me one day when said, "Sir, you're a legacy in your own lunchtime." I think that was demeaning. He was deliberate trying to take the mickey out of me. But he made this point that people spend their time worrying about, will a city be known after you, or will something be named in, and will people be talking about you when you're gone? And he said, Alexandria is still named, some couple of centuries afterwards is still named after Alexander the Great. But he doesn't know that. He's, he and his mule driver are both pushing up the daisies next to each other. There's no privilege in death. They're both dead. And so we worry a lot about what people might say about us long after our life. But actually, that's as much as complaining that people who died before you were born haven't been talking about you. So what's your view on legacy, and what would you like your legacy to be?
I think legacy for me is very different. And why do you want to be remembered? I would like to have had a positive impact on people, but also to be kind. And kindness is something we don't talk about enough. I think there's a really good illustration here on legacy. And it's about two guys sitting together in the pub. One opens the paper and says, "Oh, look, old Mr. Jones up there in the biggest house in the village has just died. Let's have a look. How much do you reckon he left? Richest man in the village." And the one bloke just looked at him and said, "He left all of it." So I know there are people who think very differently to me, who want a statue, want a town left named after them. I suppose I would like my love to live on in the hearts of my friends and my family.
That means a lot. That means a lot. And that was, funny enough, what I was saying to David. He was saying, "I haven't done as much as you and Graham have, my other brother." And I said, "That's not what we'll remember. We'll remember the kindness."
Yeah.
And we'll remember the love.
I think that love is the only thing that lasts forever. And it's very interesting that if you look at the, I'm trying to remember his name, the guy that commanded and set up the French Foreign Legion was a fearsome warrior. And yet when he died, he asked for his grave to have 3 words on it: faith, hope, and charity.
Yeah, no, I think beautiful. Well, Chris, we're coming towards the end. Last 2 questions and then your 2-minute top tip. Executive teams. You're working with teams all the time. If you were to give a top tip about taking a toxic team, which may have a toxic individual in, and making it a healthy, high-performing team, what would be your top tip?
Understand what the issues are. Let's really understand what's going on and why it's going on. And sometimes I have found that people who were bullies have left, an impact, a toxic impact on culture for 4, 5, 6 years even. So why is it people are behaving the way they're behaving? How do we create a consensus that will get people to buy in to working constructively and positively? And of course, not everybody always wants to, and some people may not wish to be there. That's another thought.
No, that's very good. And I really am resonating with that. never underestimate the shadow that you cast. Make sure it's a positive one and not a negative one. And I have thought that's so right what you just said, that people's legacy, negative or positive, when they've left a job, stays with those they've been with long after they've gone, and that becomes the way you treat people. So if they're a bully, that other people get bullied, and if they're good, then actually that will stay on even when someone evil comes in. That there's still some goodness around. Favorite book? Which would be the favorite book? We talked about a few. I'm looking forward to your One Step Beyond when it comes out again.
Yeah.
But what would be your favorite book? Something you've read on leadership?
I think the most helpful and useful book to me is, and I'm just reread it actually, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Because naturally, if we're focused and driven and task orientated, it's very easy to sometimes forget our effect on people. So I think How to Win Friends and Influence People is immensely helpful, both in our personal lives and our professional lives. And I would recommend it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And also, with your time being a prisoner of the Khmer Rouge, The Hostage at the Table by George Colro was also very...
Here it is. This is one of my favorite books as well, because it's a tremendous insight into how to influence people positively. And ironically, many years afterwards, I met George and I read his book, and much of it is exactly what I did to influence the Khmer Rouge positively to not execute us. Because what I've subsequently learned after the Khmer Rouge surrendered and it's all come out, that it was a done deal, we were to be executed, but I managed to persuade the commander, known now as Kalpon, he gave me a different name then, but persuaded him to identify with me and my Cambodian colleagues, and very much a lot of that was leading by example. I walk the talk in every single way. So yeah, lead by example.
Perfect. Well, not many people can say, when I was a prisoner of war of the Khmer Rouge, that's one hell of a story in itself. So I'm sure when people get you as a speaker, you can share more there. So Chris, would you just introduce yourself once again, say what you do, and then leave them with the 2-minute top tip, and we'll wrap up there, but stay on the line.
Okay. Hi, I'm Chris Moon, one of the luckiest people to be alive you're likely to meet. I am a former army officer. I left to work for a charity to protect the innocent by clearing landmines in Asia and Africa. I was in Cambodia for 2 years. I got taken prisoner by Khmer Rouge guerrillas. We were held for a short time. I persuaded them not to execute us and release myself and my 2 Cambodian colleagues. I stayed there for another 2 years, went to work in Mozambique, and ironically got blown up doing the least dangerous thing I ever did, walking in a safe area, for really complex and technical reasons that we couldn't prevent, although it was possible to learn from it. I was written off as dead a couple of times on my Casevac, and then I recovered much faster than they thought I would. I did my first marathon less than a year after leaving hospital, became the world's first amputee ultra-distance runner, still running ultra-distance races. And I share my experiences on the balance of life and death and limit of human endurance to help people see the bigger picture of life, to recognize that we don't need to be dragged down and beaten by the badness that we sometimes expect in life, that life truly is a gift that we sometimes take for granted. And so I can give a sense of perspective, and I can share experiences that will take away any pretense we have as human beings, to help people engage in life positively, to make the best of things, and ultimately to do what we do better.
Well, Chris, thank you. Utterly inspiring, as I knew you would be. And I wish you every success in touching the lives of people positively. You've certainly touched mine today. And I thank you on behalf of all those listening in all the different countries. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.